Hey everybody, it is Monday of Holy Week and I'm coming to you from the office in St. James as usual. It's a really strange feeling to think that there is not going to be a gathering to attend or lead on Friday or Sunday, and that we're going to have to go through this Holy Week, this time of remembering some of the most significant things about our life as believers apart from each other in our homes. And so, as I was thinking this morning, it seemed to me that you didn't need another sermon or another long reflection, but rather a time of music and reading and visuals that would remind us about the messages of this week, and in particular, a piece of it that I'm feeling convicted of that I'd really like to share with you, and even the opportunity to be able to partake in communion at home, not by being led live necessarily, but by being led on video. So if you want to pause this in order to go and get some bread and some juice or some wine so that you're prepared to celebrate communion in your home, then I'd invite you to do that. And either way, I hope that this can be meaningful. It can help add to your experience of Easter this year. What if you could go back and relive one day of your life all over again, and unmake the mistake that left you a million miles away from the you once knew? Now yesterday's shame keeps saying that you'll never get back on track. But what if I told you you're one step away from surrender, one step away from coming home? Doesn't matter how far you've gone, mercy says you don't have to keep running down the road that you're on. Love never met a lost cause. Your shame, lay it down. Leave the ghosts in the past, cause you know that you can't go back, but you can turn around. You've never been more than one step away from surrender, one step away from coming home. Come now, take up your new name. Your best life up ahead now. One step away, lay down your old chains. Come now, take up your new name. Your best life up ahead now. One step away, lay down your old chains. Come now, take up your new name. Your best life up ahead now. One step away, lay down your old chains. Come now, take up your new name. Your best life up ahead now. You're one step away. So come you're one step away. I want to read you a passage from Joshua chapter 10. Joshua chapter 10, and then I'm going to share some reflections on it. Now Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and had become their allies. He and his people were very much alarmed at this, because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. So Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem and Hebron and Jarmuth and Lachish and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us." So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, so Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth-horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth-horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. As it is written in the book of Jasher, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. I felt led to share that story and to share some comments on it from a book that I read called Sun Stand Still, which was written by Stephen Furtick, who's my favorite inspirational author, about this passage and about the idea of praying a prayer and living a life that is a sun stand still prayer or a sun stand still life. You may recall we've talked about this at either a retreat or a sermon or maybe even both. But I really felt drawn to it again this year because I was reminded that communion is to remind us of a sun stand still kind of moment in Jesus' life and death and crucifixion and eventual resurrection. And because it reminds us that God has already accomplished the impossible. And so when I think of that, I think about how communion is not just to remind us of the truth of the impossible thing that has happened, but it's supposed to inspire in us a faith and a togetherness with each other that will lead us to pray our own sun stand still prayers, and that will lead us to experience our own moments where God does what seems to be impossible. I can remember a time in my life, I shared one in the kids video the other day, But I can also remember another time in my life. I just graduated from university, and I tried desperately to get a job back in the Waterloo region because I found a church home at Steinman's and friends in Baden and New Hamburg, and I wanted to be here. But I couldn't find a job, so I went back to my co-op job in Toronto, kind of begrudgingly, and not really wanting to be there. And I can remember, I don't remember who it was, but one of the folks at Steinman's when I was home on the weekend asked me about my work and asked me about where I was working, and I said I was working near Toronto. I went back to my co-op job, and they said to me, would you like to come back and work in Waterloo in this region at some point? And I said I sure would, but I wasn't able to find one. So short of divine intervention, it doesn't look like I'll be getting back here anytime soon. What ended up happening was the boss whose division I was assigned to at the company in Toronto, for whom I was doing practically no work because his divisions were not actually operating, ended up getting a partnership in a company making similar product and offered me a job as his controller. Now, to this day, I don't know why he offered that job to me. I don't believe he'd seen enough in me at that point to know what I could or couldn't do. Sometimes I joke I must have just been the only accountant he knew. And I was so shocked when he said it to me in his office that I walked away saying no. And then I went back home and I talked with my friends and I thought, reflected and prayed about it. And I thought, man, I might have just closed a huge door that God was trying to open for me without even finding out what it was all about. And so I invented an excuse to go back to my boss, Joe's office. And I sat down and I said, I'd like to reconsider it. Can you tell me more about it? And he went into explaining what the company did and who he was partnering with and what his plans were and what his hopes and dreams were. And he said to me, I've been telling people that the company is in London, but it's actually in Waterloo. Everything that's happened and come to me in my life since that day was set up by God pushing me to go back and say to Joe, what did you have in mind? Taking that job, getting back to the region, ending up as a pastor, ending up at MCEC, none of those things happened if I had said no and not found out about that job. Now, that may not be the same as the sun standing still in the sky and lasting for an extra day. And it may not even be the biggest miracle that you've ever heard about or seen. But it's a reminder to me that if I can believe in God for the impossible and live with a faith that says that even something that doesn't make sense or is uncomfortable might be God's call on my life, then I can experience life and faith in a way that's different than when we just meet on Sundays, exchange our pleasantries and rituals, and then go home. Furtick, in his book Sun Stands Still, writes a version of this that I've modified for our setting in some cases. This idea of a sun stands still faith is not like a worm snuggie. It won't go down like a smooth cup of coffee. It is not meant to calm or to coddle us. With God's help, it can incite almost a riot in our minds. It can trip our breakers and turn out our lights in our favorite hiding places of insecurity and fear. And then flip the switch back on so that God's truth can illuminate the divine destiny that may have been laying dormant inside of us for years. In short, we are seeking this Easter to activate our audacious faith, to inspire ourselves to ask God for what seems impossible, and in the process to reconnect us with our God-sized purpose and potential. If we are articulating or living a theology of communion that doesn't directly connect to the greatness of God and connect that with our potential to do great things on God's behalf, that theology of communion is not biblical. File it away under heresy. In fact, take this one step further. If we're not daring to believe God for the impossible, then we're sleeping through some of the best parts of our Christian lives. And further still, if the size of our vision for our lives isn't at least a little bit intimidating to us, then there's a good chance that it's insulting to God. Audacious faith is the raw material that authentic Christianity is made of. It's the stuff that triggers ordinary, level-headed people like us to start living life with unusual boldness. And when we live this way, our eyes will be open to see our day-to-day life in vivid color. Our spiritual growth will accelerate at an almost supernatural pace. Audacity makes regular people behave with boldness or daring, especially with confident disregard for personal comfort or conventional thought. And if we really think about it, confident disregard for the status quo is the essence of the gospel. It describes the radical path that Christ's life took on earth, that took him all the way to death and the cross. And it goes to the heart of what it means for us to live by faith and faith alone. And it goes to the heart of the power of God at work in communion, which reminds us that when there seems to be no way, God makes a way. Here, moving in our midst, we worship you, we worship you. You are here, working in this place, we worship you, we worship you. You are miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. We worship you, we worship you. You are here, healing every heart. We worship you, we worship you. You are a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, turning lives around. We worship you, we worship you. Miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when we don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when we don't see it, you're working. Even when we don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when we don't see it, you're working. Even when we don't feel it, you're working. light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 See, when the disciples were there at the Last Supper and at the crucifixion, they didn't know that God was still working. And they didn't know that God could make a way when it seemed like the way was gone. And so as we celebrate communion, my hope is that we can remember that we are forgiven, that we're one step away from not having all of the burdens of our life have to drag us down in the same way. But it's also a reminder that when it seems impossible in our lives, the God we believe in can still make a way. That's why Jesus gave his body for us. That's why he willingly was broken and went to the cross for us. So that in his body, broken for us, we could be brought together as a body that could experience the way-making presence of God in our lives as families and as individuals and as a congregation. And that's why he said, take and eat my body broken for you. When you do this, do it in remembrance of me. See, to remind us that with God there's always a way when there seems to be no other way, is why Jesus gave his blood for us. It's why he bled and died for us, so that we could experience a life that doesn't have the boundaries that come from not having the power of God in our lives. And so when, on his last night, he took the cup after supper and he looked at his disciples, he said, this represents the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. And so when you do this together, do it in remembrance of me. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for being that way-making presence in our lives. We thank you that even when we can't see it or feel it, you are always working. And I pray, God, that even in this time of separation, even this time where we might be anxious or scared or wondering when things will get back to normal, I pray, God, that you will be with us and remind us of your presence that makes a way where there seems to be no way. That you are a promise keeper, a miracle worker, a light in the darkness, because that's who you are. And so in this communion, remind us that you have already demonstrated how you make ways when there are no other ways. Remind us that you've already made the sun stand still. And give us the faith to respond to what we hear you calling us to in our lives, even if it seems crazy, even if it seems ridiculous, and even if it seems audacious. Because you are the kind of God that desires that kind of life for us. Pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Jesus didn't die to protect our comfortable, reasonable, and logical way of life. which has been disrupted by this COVID-19 business. Jesus died so that we could have the opportunity, unencumbered by sin and shame, to take the chance on another kind of faith. There is nothing our world needs more desperately today in individuals and families and businesses and churches and communities than God's saving supernatural acts, just like the one that communion reminds us of, especially during Holy Week. And God is ready to act if we are bold enough to ask. Not just for a good day today or a better life, but to ask God for the impossible. Each of us is called to be a Joshua, each in our own way, in our own circumstances, with our own God-given personality and methods. We are called not just to have faith, but to activate our faith by asking God for giant outcomes, taking giant steps, and believing that if we have the audacity to act, then God has the ability to perform. That's how God turns his amazing promise of Easter into an everyday reality in every generation for Joshua's and for ours. Maybe we won't see the same kinds of miracles that Joshua did. But it doesn't matter because we serve the same God. His nature never changes. The same power that stopped the sun and the same power that raised Christ from the grave lives in every one of us who believe and who call on his name. Please don't hear me wrong. Audacious faith is not about throwing ourselves off the top of a mountain and expecting God to catch us. It's not about thinking that God is in our back pocket and we can manipulate him for our own purposes in any circumstance. And it's not about entering a gifted or talented program for the spiritually elite. Audacious faith is for school teachers. It's for stay-at-home moms. It's for accountants and pastors. It's for 5th grade girls and 6th grade boys and 5th grade boys and 6th grade girls. It's for construction workers and bankers and college students and salesmen and for all people in all walks of life. Because choosing to live with sun stand still faith is for everyone. Sure, it risks us being disappointed when what we think we've heard from God doesn't line up for what God is ready to do at that time. But it will never be the easiest way to live. And in fact, it's downright intimidating. But it's the best way to live. And if we really want to be a part of what God is doing in the world and in our generation, it's the only way to live. Through Jesus Christ, our living hope. How great the chasm that lay between us. How high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation I turned to heaven and spoke your way into the night. Then through the darkness your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages set down from glory to wear my sin and to bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your very body began to breathe out of the silence. The roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the victory. Hallelujah, praise the one who sets me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation